Welcome to Living Yoga. My name is Darren, and in this show, we talk about all things related to yoga, mindfulness, and wellness. And one of the things that I have found is not discussed enough, especially in the sort of mindfulness wellness space, is mental wellness and finding a place of balance, especially if you're struggling with depression or other forms of mental illness. So, in this episode, I have a very special guest. His name is Mark Henick. His book is So Called Normal, which I love because I feel like it could be my autobiography title. I feel like you stole it from me. And his website is markhenick.ca. And he has a fascinating story, and he's been an advocate for mental health, wellness, and recovery with a really, what I think is a really hopeful message. So I'm excited to chat with him about that. A few quick things before we dive in. First, I will post links to his website and his book in the show notes, along with the National Suicide Hotline SMS number, which is 988. You can text that and get help if you're struggling with anything. And I will also post links to my website and other resources we mention on the show. So with that said, let's dive right in. Mark, welcome.
Hi, Darren.
It's really nice to chat with you. Your book is really, really inspiring, and I think your story is sort of the story many of us hope for, but a lot of people don't find for themselves or for their loved ones. And so I'm wondering if you could just briefly talk about the story that led to the book, specifically what happened on the bridge that night. And then we'll dive into sort of more talking about advice for friends, family, and people who might be struggling right now.
Sure. I called the book So Called Normal because I think my recovery was so much about letting go of that idea of what normal actually means. I grew up in a small town struggling with my mental health in this hyper masculine sort of household where boys don't cry and it's you're a sinner if you ever think about anything dark like suicide, for example, as I did for much of my childhood. And I wanted nothing else than just to be like everybody else. I felt so different all the time. And I didn't know that other people actually struggled with these sorts of things too. In fact, suicidal ideation is incredibly common. Mental health problems and illnesses, especially among men for that matter, is incredibly common. But I didn't know that as a kid growing up. So, when I was as young as probably 8 or 9 years old, I started struggling with suicidal thoughts. And I was first hospitalized when I was 12. If it wasn't for a teacher actually who found out about that, because I was, when you're so encumbered by pain in your own mind and in your own soul, it leaks out in sometimes the most unexpected ways. People think they do a good job of hiding it, when really I think what's happening is that the majority of people just ignore the signs and symptoms, or they don't know what to look for in terms of the signs and symptoms that people exhibit. So that was a combination of the case for me. I didn't want anybody to know that I was struggling because I didn't want them to know that I was weak. I learned that from a very young age. But also people didn't know what to look for, especially in a small town, in a religious community, a predominantly religious community at that. So,
Do you mind if I ask how old you are? Because I think our sort of general understanding of suicide, depression, mental health has, like, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and it's very, very different now. I'm wondering what decade are you
so this was in
here?
the 80s and 90s, but we talk about how different it is now, and you're right to a degree. We can get into that later. I have thoughts on that. But we have come a long way, but more recently than a lot of people realize. I think it's only been in the last maybe 10 years that people have opened up as much as they have. But that said, that is a significant difference from how it used to be in the 80s and the 90s, and certainly prior to that as well. We still have a good way to go. But I mean, at the time, nobody talked about these kinds of issues. And in fact, if you disclosed that you were suicidal, as it still does in many places, it scares people away. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to help you. Or they just outright dismiss you. That still happens all the time too. What do you have to be depressed about? Or why would you do something as crazy or stupid or sinful or wrong or whatever as think about killing yourself, as selfish as that? When of course that's not what it's about at all. When you're suicidal, and this is what I dedicated really my life to helping people understand ever since, your goal isn't necessarily to die, ironically. It's to not live with the type of pain that you're carrying. You have no other way to deal with it. It's an escape mechanism in so many ways. Before we went live here, you mentioned just briefly about the overdose crisis that is really gripping America and around the world. And we know that very often substance-related disorders are based in trauma and this need to escape ourselves in this way too. So, I think it is all connected here, and this inability to sit with discomfort, this idea that we must escape suffering at all costs. And I think that's fundamentally what suicide is about, this idea that you're not strong enough and that it's always going to be this way. So that's what I was convinced of. And I started having these attempts, as I mentioned, at a very young age. I was in and out of hospital more than half a dozen times until eventually I had this experience where I just had fully given up. I went to a bridge in my hometown late one night. I climbed over the railing and I was fully prepared to jump. And if it wasn't for a stranger who apparently was just on his way to work that night, he was working a night shift, he saw me and he stopped. He talked to me for what seemed like forever, but it might have only been a few minutes. Time sort of does funny things when you're in that kind of dilated place in your mind. And then ultimately, he ended up reaching out and grabbing me and pulling me off of the edge of that bridge after I had let go of the railing. I think that was the moment for me that things really started to change. I didn't know that at the time, but I started to realize that, there are people out there who have that capacity to really see you and to feel with you and to actually reach out, both literally in my case, but also metaphorically to reach out and help you. And I think that's when I decided at some unconscious level to be like that person who reached out and saved my life. I thought if he could do it, then I can too. So that's what I dedicated my life to ever since.
Yeah. Is he still in your life? I'm curious.
So after that happened, I went off to college and then grad school, settled in, I now live in Toronto, Canada, working as a mental health counselor for 16 to 24-year-old youth, trying to be the person that I needed when I was younger. And I had no idea who that person was all that time. So I did a TEDx talk in 2013 in which I told that story about him, not knowing who he was at the time. And then suddenly I got flooded with messages from people all over the world telling me that I was their stranger, that they had gone on Google to search for ways to kill themselves. And they came across this video in which I told the story of my life being saved during a suicide attempt, and they stopped. And that impacted me so profoundly in two ways. One, I felt incredibly grateful and gratified. But two, I also felt like an imposter because I didn't even know if the story was real. I didn't know if I had just hallucinated it all because it all just seemed so tidy. So that really is what provoked me to find out, to find this stranger who saved my life. And I went to media. I'd been working in media then for a number of years. And I asked for the public's help in finding this stranger who saved my life. The story went viral all over the world. and then the next day, we found him. And it turns out his name is Mike. And he didn't know that I was still alive after he saved my life that night. He didn't know if I just went back the next day and finished it. So I finally actually, more than a dozen years later, got to meet him. I got to thank him for saving my life and to show him the incredible life that I've been able to build ever since, all because he was willing to reach out at that time.
Wow. Well, I'm grateful for Mike, all the Mikes in the world. I have a question about what Mike did that night and what you are doing in your own way. And what I think maybe a lot of us who have the best of intentions are missing. And that is, I think we see somebody who is depressed or stuck or in pain, and we don't want to make it worse, so we
Hmm.
don't talk about
Hmm.
it, right? You seem really sad. Let's cheer you up.
Yeah.
And what you really need is somebody to say, "I see your pain. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, this sucks.
Yeah.
You're in a hard place." I'm wondering if you have advice for people who see friends, family members. How do you talk about a subject that is perhaps scary for you and uncomfortable, and you feel like I don't know what to say, so I just won't say anything, or I'll cheer them up, I'll buy them some flowers
Hmm.
or take them out to an amusement park. um, I'm wondering what your advice is for anybody listening that might have somebody in their life that they're concerned about.
I think we so often lock into this fixer fixation where we just want all the bad stuff to go away. And that's what we focus on. We want to make them better. Um, and I think when we do that, it ignores the reality of their pain. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And I think that when we ignore the reality of the pain, it discounts them, and it doesn't make them feel seen, because for them, the pain is real. And when somebody is just
Yeah.
trying to distract them from it, then you're not taking it seriously. So you're right, it sucks, and it's okay for it to suck. You're allowed to sit with somebody and have it suck together. That's okay. That's a more powerful intervention in many ways than not meeting them where they are and just trying to get them to snap out of it or distract them. Those can be helpful tools too. In anybody's recovery toolbox, sometimes you do have to distract yourself. Sometimes you do have to push yourself to do something that you're not comfortable doing in order to get yourself moving or to get yourself out of a rut or whatever trip you're on in that moment. But you first have to actually reconcile with where you currently are. Acceptance is key. You have to accept your own state, but you also have to accept the radical imperfection of others too. People aren't going to be who you want them to be, or even who you need them to be most of the time, and that's okay. You can love them anyway. Love
Yeah.
people in their imperfection, and I think that's what heals people.
Yeah. um, I'm curious, your much of your message is very optimistic. It's a very difficult subject, and yet you have found a measure of healing, a
Mm-hmm.
measure of balance in your life. Um, and I think for people who struggle, I'm thinking like with bipolar or any kind of depression, where they go into these deep, dark
Mm-hmm.
places that it's hard to see any way
Yeah.
out. You seem to have found that. I'm wondering how often you still struggle with depression and other mental health challenges, and what's working for you, because you seem to be doing really, really well and inspiring thousands of people.
You know, when I was in it, when you're in it, you don't know you're in it. When you're in that place, it's so dark, so constricted, and you don't really have anything to compare it to. So you think that it's just the way that it's always going to be. And then this weird thing starts to happen early on in recovery, where maybe you have a good day or a good moment, and it shows you what life could be like outside of that bubble. But then sometimes it collapses back in, it darkens again, and you lose sight of it. You even forget about it. But then you keep working, you keep walking, you keep doing what's necessary, or even just slogging it out sometimes, because sometimes that's what recovery is. Recovery isn't always super inspiring, heartwarming, beautiful work. Sometimes you just got to grind it out just to get through the day, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
You do what you have to do. But I remember early on when my depression would relapse, or when I would go into remission rather, and then it would relapse, and I'd be so hard on myself that, oh, this again, I'm back, I'll never get out of it because I thought I was done with it, and yet here I am again. And then what started to happen, and this is only something that I can now talk about, several years out of it, looking back on that process, was that the remissions would get longer, the relapses would get further and further apart and shorter. And you don't realize that until a few times in. You get really good after a while, though, at being depressed. Eventually, I think you can come to a place where you learn how, and it doesn't just happen on its own. You do have to put in the effort to learn how, to see it coming, to recognize what the symptoms in yourself are that you're going back into that place, and then to have a set of tools or skills or things that you know how to do to at least blunt the pain while you're in it, in productive ways, that is, until you come back out of it again. And I think that was my recovery journey. And I've never met anybody who magically found the right medication or the most amazing therapist in the world who unlocked everything for them, or had this sort of revelation experience that snapped them out of their depression. I've never seen that happen. It's a much slower, more iterative process that you learn something new about yourself and about your experience, your suffering, every time you revisit it. So that was my experience, and now I can say now that I haven't experienced anything that I would qualify as depression in years. Actually, does that mean that I don't have hard days and hard times and moments sometimes? No, of course I do. We all go through seasons of our life that seem unbearable, that are difficult. But that's the richness of real human life. The goal isn't to be happy; it's to be healthy, and healthy includes sadness and suffering and despair and the entire range of human experience. So I think it's about changing your relationship to that experience.
Have you, as a Buddhist and a yogi, you're speaking my language, but have you seen the movie Inside Out, where Joy is always trying to shut Blue up because she's just so depressing, and we always have to be happy, and of course, that each of those emotions have an important role to play.
They do. We have to allow for them. Now, that said, though, I will say, as a formerly depressed person, that there is a caution there, that there's something very tempting about, and there's a boundary between allowing it in a healthy, loving, non-clinging way versus actually sliding back into that place where you're stuck again. You have to allow yourself to suffer. And you hear all the time in stigma reduction campaigns, it's okay not to be okay. But that said, you also have to balance the equation. It's okay to be okay as well. And sometimes when you've been depressed for a really long time, you get suspicious of your happiness. Why do I feel good right now? This isn't going to last. I don't know, something's going to blow this up or go sideways, or I'm going to screw it up. Instead, it's okay to let yourself be happy too. And I think sometimes we're afraid to do that.
Yeah. I'm curious, and if you don't want to answer this, that's okay. I'm curious what your what I'll call therapy is. I mean, is that medication? Is it meditation? Is it diet? Is it exercise? Is it all of the above? Like, what combination of things helped you find this state of balance? And noting, of course, that it's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah, sure. It absolutely is different for everybody. But, certainly all of the above. I've tried just about everything. I was on medications for over a decade. And it was a necessary part of my journey. I was on many different medications for many years. But ultimately, it's not what I needed to recover. I think it served probably a necessary function at the time. But then ultimately it was facing myself, I would say. That was the first thing. Writing my book was extremely therapeutic. Really actually working through my narrative, my story, making my story make sense was incredibly therapeutic, because I don't think we realize that we have all these memories and experiences in our head, and they just take this amorphous kind of form. And then eventually, because of our negativity bias very often, they turn into something that doesn't serve us. And we think that we have no control over that the narrative in our head is just the way that it is. That's just reality. That's not true. you actually get to write your own story. You get to and you get to edit it. You get to
Yeah.
change it and shape it. So really getting in there and
Yeah.
doing that with my story, making it make sense, was incredibly therapeutic. But also, my
Yeah.
mindfulness practice, my meditative practice, has been transformative as well. That idea of being able to sit with discomfort, quite literally, and sit through it, in order to find that other transcendent place on the other side of it, that more spacious and open place
Yeah.
where you're not suffocating under the day-to-day sort of
Yeah.
anxieties. That's been incredibly therapeutic for me as well.
Yeah. Um, in the time we have left, I would love to know. Um, Again, this is sort of tethered to my initial question about, for if you know somebody you love that's struggling, and you don't know what to say or do, like, what do you do? I'm wondering, for the person who is struggling right now. Again, I'll put it's 988 is the number to text for the National Suicide Hotline. But I'm wondering if you have any advice for somebody who has literally been on that bridge looking over into the abyss and found your way with some help, found your way off that bridge. What advice do you have for somebody who's in a dark place, who's struggling, or maybe is in an okay place now, but it's a cyclical thing? They will likely find themselves in that despair at some point in the future.
The writer Anne Lamott has said in her advice to writers that you own everything that has happened to you. And why I find that helpful and inspiring is that you can do something good with your suffering. I think that's ultimately what I learned how to do. That this isn't a liability. These thoughts that you're having, this struggle that you're going through, whatever it is, I think it's actually at the heart of creativity. That pathos, that energy. There's something there. It's unharnessed in this moment, yes, and it's causing you a great deal of suffering, but you can redirect it into something else. Whether that's helping others to not go into that place as you, or channeling it into your writing or your art or your dance or your music, or your science or whatever it might be. Using it as a motivation can do incredible things. It gives you a sense of purpose. People think that your purpose is out there waiting for you to find, as though it's just lost on the side of the road, and that's not it at all. Purpose is built. Purpose is created. You get to invent that for yourself. So I think that once you reclaim your agency, and you fight back against a system that was not designed to help you, then that helps you to not just find your place in this world, but to create it.
Yeah. One thing you said when we were starting off, and I want to sort of circle back to this as we wind things down, is I asked you about what decade you grew up in and how things have changed, and you said something about where we're currently at, and I'm wondering what your report card is and what your prescription is for us as a society, both the mental health branch of things as well as just society at large, how we portray stuff in the media, how we talk about things with friends, how we just sort of collectively understand depression and mental health challenges.
Yeah, this is such a.
I'm wondering, where are we at, and where would you like to see us go?
This is such a great question, because there's no doubt we've come a long way in terms of public conversation about mental health. We see a lot more celebrities talking openly about it. Research has shown that millennials and younger are much more likely than Gen X and older to have these kinds of conversations. And not only that, not only are they more likely to have these kinds of conversations, they're more likely to actually get help for themselves too, which is a good thing. That said, I think that the level of awareness that we're building in society now is very superficial. It's predominantly biomedically oriented. There's been the pendulum, the paradigmatic pendulum always swings back and forth. And right now it seems to be very much that talk to your doctor, get your medication, and it will treat this illness that's inside you. That can be helpful, and it's partially helpful, but it's also not the whole picture. Not even from a scientific perspective is it the whole picture. So I think that where we need to go is to have a more holistic perspective, not only on what mental health problems and illnesses are, but what mental health is, what happiness and thriving is, and then support people to do that. Because as long as we're just trying to chase away the boogeyman, we're never actually creating a world and a life that we want to live in. And I think that's where we need to focus. We need to focus on creating more mentally healthy world where it's easier to be human.
Yeah. I was talking yesterday to a group of yoga teachers in training, and I was saying how sometimes yoga is presented by this guru who is enlightened and perfect, and of course that doesn't exist, and they turn out to be frauds.
Very often, yes.
But where yoga really shines is when yoga teachers allow their brokenness to be sort of refused together, like a stained glass window is broken glass that's been sort of fused together to make a beautiful, beautiful piece of art. And I think each of us has our own brokenness, our own struggle, our own pain, our own suffering. And I think we haven't quite talked about, what you were saying. Just we talk about the dark side and this thing that we need to medicate and get rid of. But some of the greatest art we have. I mean, Robin Williams comes to mind as somebody who was absolutely brilliant and struggled, and that struggle probably brought some of his creative juices to life.
We're all wounded and we're all healers as well, and it really is very much a balance of those two things. I think that recognizing that in other people helps to, when they float off a little bit too far away, maybe to rein them back in, or likewise encourage other people who are too cloistered by the social norms and expectations to help them break out of that a little bit and be themselves a little bit more. I think there is a middle ground in there in which we can be more fluid and this changes at different phases of our life as well. Sometimes we need to be a little bit less structured in order to find out what's there creatively. And other times we need to discipline ourselves. I think we have to get out of this mindset that there's any one normal, static, permanent way of being, that we're always changing to meet our own personal needs and the needs of the environment that are around us.
That is a perfect segue back to reminding people about your book, So-Called Normal. Mark, like, if your book is such an important book and your work is truly exceptional, and as soon as I became aware of you and your work, I was like, I need to interview him. I'm wondering if there's anything we missed, and I think on subjects like this that are pretty heavy and I think riddled with misinformation. I'm wondering if there's anything you need to clean up about questions I even asked that were off the mark.
No, not at all.
Just anything that we need to clean up here that you feel is important.
No, I think that once we reconcile with the idea that we are hardwired to struggle, that's just part of the deal of being human, then it gets us out of this idea of it's this toxic idea of it's not supposed to be this way. What does that even mean? It is what it is, not in a sort of resigning ourselves fatalistically to negative things in our life, but we have to embrace all of it. And as soon as we start trying to run from our pain or our suffering or our difficulty or illness or whatever the boogeyman is or the dark side is, that's where we find pathology. It's not in the it's not in the thing itself, it's in the clinging or the friction or the resistance to it. If we open ourselves up to every experience, yes, and I am that too, then I think we can forego so much of our suffering that is caused by the resistance of saying no, saying yes more, even when it's unexpected, I think can be incredibly therapeutic.
Well said, my friend. Mark Henick, So-Called Normal is the book. I will put links to Mark's website and to his book on Amazon in the show notes. And again, I will put the National Suicide Hotline SMS number, which is 988. If you're feeling overwhelmed or stuck or depressed or suicidal or anything else, even if you just have questions, text that number. And I will put some other resources in as well. And if you know somebody who is struggling with depression or suicide thoughts, or you yourself are, Mark's book is an incredible, incredible resource, and I'm really grateful that you wrote it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.